We have been given our first look at the return of Verdansk in Warzone in 2025. Now, Verdansk returns on April 3rd, and there has been a lot of questions as to how faithful the actual remaster of Verdansk is going to be, what the goal is, and are the developers going to try and reinvent the wheel. Thanks to a 2-minute in-depth video today from Verdansk Gaming, not only do we get our first look at what Verdansk is actually going to look like, but we also get an idea of just how faithful Call of Duty are trying to be in relation to the original product they released back in 2020. Now, generally speaking, there are a couple of bonuses of Verdansk coming back before we touch on the faithfulness of this remaster. To start with, those of you who are playing on console, you didn't previously have an FOV slider, you also didn't really have the ability to adjust colors and vibrancy, and all of that is now part and package of the current Call of Duty experience. So playing a wider field of view on Verdansk will be up your street, and it means that you should have a better visual experience that feels a little bit more engaging and a little bit more fair, because you have to bear in mind, PC players have always had the ability to scale their FOV. It was only back in Verdansk did console players not have that ability. Alongside this nice to have, they're claiming to have a better global illumination system, including a brand new skybox, which is supposed to be brighter and a bit more detailed, as well as better transitions lighting-wise going from inside to outside and vice versa. They've also mentioned generally that the resolutions and textures that you should be seeing should be higher res, and that most people across all platforms are going to see a visual bump and upgrade across the board. And honestly, so far, it does actually look pretty good. Now, I know lots of people think very fondly of Verdansk, but it is worth remembering that in the past, Verdansk very much had a very grey, very beige color scale. It had these really low-res textures in places, and as much as I absolutely enjoyed the map and had a great time with it, in terms of modern standards, it probably wouldn't necessarily be up to scratch. And they're claiming to have fixed that as much as they can: grass, mud, textures, water, illumination, reflections, all of that has been scaled upwards going into this new iteration. Now, those of you might be wondering just how faithful a remaster is this going to be of the original Verdansk that you all know and love. Well, just off this video alone, we've got some pretty good confirmations that this is going to be pretty much exactly what Verdansk was, with a closed-up stadium, with very few of the changes like Nakatomi Plaza and some of the other things they did later on in the life cycle. And most importantly, and probably the biggest bonus in my view, is no redeploy drones have been introduced in this map. By the looks of things from what we've seen in this video, you don't have these balloons that allow you to fly across the map in 0.5 of a second, because honestly, I think that's really ruined the traditional flow of BR that we've come to expect and experience in Call of Duty. Don't get me wrong, I was absolutely an advocate for redeploy drones when they initially released, but upon reflection, as good as they have been in some instances, they've actually ruined the flow of gameplay about making strategic movement choices, about decision making, about being a more traditional battle royale where there are consequences for your actions and no easy escapes. But what we have seen is a couple of little zip lines here and there that have been added to buildings. Now, you may remember some of these did start getting added later on into the Verdansk 1984 recycle, and we did see a few more of them being introduced on various buildings and blocks. That has very much been the same here. There are some that you would have noticed from previously, and it wouldn't be that much of a surprise, but there are, by the looks of things, one or two that appear to have been added to certain buildings, which I'm very much a fan of. You know, especially for example ATC Tower. I would be utterly astonished if Verdansk released an ATC Tower was still a single internal zipline to get to the roof. That, in my view, is probably a decision that we want to avoid. This time, it looks as though ATC Tower does have some kind of zipline up to the top, and hopefully that's how it will remain. The Gulag and pretty much all of Verdansk seems to be an incredibly faithful remaster of the original with a slightly better lighting system, the bonuses of field of view, the bonuses of a couple of lighting changes and rendering changes that should increase the quality, but without changing the overall feel. I've got to say, just in my general initial impressions of what we've seen here, this seems like a resounding big dub early on, and I honestly think Verdansk looks great with what they've done so far. Now, undoubtedly, the proof will very much be in the pudding when it releases in Season 3, but the only thing I hope we see is that the map is a little bit more vibrant. In some of the marketing that we've seen so far, they've released these really colourful colour palettes that I think makes Verdansk pop, and I think it makes it look good. I'd be really disappointed if it was a real grayscale map again that we kind of had in the original era. Granted, I know some people want to stay faithful to what it looked like, but for me, honestly, I think Call of Duty generally has a bit of a vibrance problem. and historically it's been on players to up their vibrance to compensate for an otherwise bland palette. The waterways are the same, there shouldn't be an introduction of new water on the map, there aren't redeploy balloons, they haven't seemingly added a huge amount of zip lines or huge amounts of cover to the map. It just seems to be a faithful rendition of what was there before. And honestly, I think that's what most people are expecting. I don't think Verdansk is a perfect map, and I do have some issues with it, but there's no doubt that it is a fan favorite for a reason, and seeing it being done faithfully seems like a big bonus in my view. There probably will be the odd hiccup or error here or there, or maybe the odd change here or there, but in the grand scheme of things, it looks like they're going for as authentic as humanly possible. Now, on the whole, this is an exciting first step for Season 3 of Warzone. The return of Verdansk is something that's highly touted. I think all of us are very much looking forward to it. The only thing I will say is that this is just step one of many. Now, the return of floating loot is happening, we're also getting vertical buy station lists. There seems to be a push towards a generally large quality of life update to reflect the original Modern Warfare experience that we had long ago. Now, there will be one school of thought that's very happy with this and will give it lots of praise and is very excited. There will definitely be another school of thought that didn't think it needed to change in the first place and doesn't exactly want to celebrate a change that shouldn't have already happened. I'm definitely in the second side of that camp, and quite frankly, I don't really feel the need to applaud Call of Duty for changing things back to how they should have been in the first place. But there's a lot more that we need to see with Verdansk. You know, will these returning audiences be able to improvise and adapt with the introduction of Omni movement? Will the meta actually be balanced so that the new guns that are returning from that era of Modern Warfare 2019 are actually the guns that we want in the game? The worst thing I can imagine is people hopping back in with a HDR or an AMAX, and it takes them 75 years to level up the guns, or all of the Black Ops 6 guns are all meta, and they don't have any of them leveled up, and it just devolves into a mess. But arguably, the biggest things and the things that keep people constantly on their toes are the things that Call of Duty need to circle back to the most. Audio. Traditionally in Verdansk was underlyingly terrible, and I really hope that audio doesn't become a problem. Now I will say, towards the end of the Urzikstan life cycle, audio's actually pretty good now. It's not perfect, but it's as good as it probably has been so far in the Warzone franchise. I would really like to make sure and see that that is the case for Verdansk, because a lot can change, different materials, different textures, which can lead to different sound cues, or no sound cues at all if something goes wrong. So I really hope that isn't the case. I hope audio comes out on top. The second thing is just the anti-cheat. Today alone, I played a game where I was running into entire squads of hackers just straight up running the show. And that is a pubs experience that absolutely nobody wants. Granted, lots of returning players is going to spread out that problem amongst much more people, but without a substantial anti-cheat update, I really don't know how long Verdansk will last. Call of Duty has been getting a lot of praise for shutting down a lot of cheat providers, but the reality is a lot of them will just rebrand or open operations in slightly obscure countries so they can get away with this kind of regulatory oversight and avoid any legal action. And that's something that Call of Duty needs to recognize is just part of a number of numerous steps to slow this thing down. I really hope we see substantial changes in Season 3 with Ricochet. I don't think they'll necessarily talk about it because it isn't really beneficial to the overall support of Ricochet to be public about what's changed, but I just need to see something. I need to see an abundance of cheaters vanishing very quickly and very early on. And the final thing for me, and probably the biggest thing, is I just want Verdansk to be fun. I want it to be as authentic a replication of what we used to have. You know, the original buildings, the original vehicles, the sandboxy environment. I want them to really separate ranked from casual in this experience and actually start focusing on just making COD a fun sandbox again and making it less of a sweatfest. I'm definitely one of the people who have been part of that problem, because so long as ranked hasn't existed, I've constantly demanded that things be more balanced, more competitive. But now that ranked does exist, we can have a clear divide between what is fun and wacky and what is just a competitive experience. And also bring back some LTMs. Juggernaut Royale was one of my favorite LTMs that was ever done in Verdansk, and I think I'd be remiss if I didn't ask to see it in this iteration too. So folks, let me know your thoughts and feelings on Verdansk in the comment section down below. As always, thank you for watching. Make sure you drop a like, consider subscribing as well. We're on the road to 200,000. And I'd love to hear your thoughts and feelings on Verdansk in Season 3. Not only just the map, but whether or not you really see yourself coming back to Warzone. As always, thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.